Good evening and welcome to the Sleep to Lore series. Tonight we'll talk about The Dead Zone, a tragic story set in the cold winters of Maine, where a man wakes up from a long coma with a psychic curse. If you'd like, subscribe or comment to support the channel. As a new channel, every member who joins is helping to build this library of lore from the ground up. If you want to support these deep dives, click the join button below. Before we begin, I have a question for you. If you could touch an object and see its entire history, would you consider that a gift or a heavy burden? Comment your thoughts below. Now let's step into the snow and uncover the mystery. Prologue. The story begins on the ice. January 1953, Runaround Pond. The atmosphere is deceptive, classic Americana, burning tires and cold breath. But King often uses nostalgia to hide the teeth of a trap. 6-year-old Johnny Smith is obsessed with skating backward, a small ambition that leads to a catastrophic pivot. He glides unknowingly into the path of a hockey game and is leveled by a larger boy. The impact is sickening. Johnny blacks out into a void of black ice. When he wakes, the neural pathways have fundamentally shifted. He mumbles incoherently about acid and explosions, a psychic leak foretelling a battery accident that will blind a friend weeks later. It's the first friction of the second sight grinding against reality, born entirely from trauma. Johnny recovers, burying the memory, but the door in his mind has been kicked ajar. Shift to the suffocating heat of 1955 Iowa. We meet Greg Stillson, a 22-year-old Bible salesman. He represents the darker, predatory side of American ambition. When a farm dog challenges him, the mask of the charming salesman dissolves instantly. He blinds the animal with ammonia and kicks it to death in a fit of narcissistic rage simply because it tore his trousers. This isn't just cruelty, it's pathology. We see that Stillson is haunted by blinding headaches and the hallucinatory voice of his dead father calling him a runt. He soothes his fragility with terrifying delusions of grandeur. As he drives away, leaving death in the dust, he is convinced that greatness is his destiny. The narrative board is now set. A psychic victim in Maine and a sociopathic monster in the Midwest, unaware that their timelines are destined to violently collide. Chapter 1. The narrative begins not in the moment, but in memory. Years later, looking back through the lens of tragedy and time, Sarah Bracknell would isolate two specific images from that Halloween season of 1970. A run of impossible luck at a carnival game, and a mask. It is the mask that haunts her most. A symbol of the duality that was about to descend upon their lives. The setting is Cleves Mills, a small Maine town existing in the shadow of the University of Orono. It is a time of distinct unrest. The bulletin board in Johnny Smith's apartment building displays not just requests for rides, but a poster of a clenched fist screaming "Strike" against a fiery background. The Vietnam War and the spectre of Nixon hover over the mundane lives of the characters, grounding this supernatural tale in the gritty, polarized reality of the era. Sarah arrives at Johnny's apartment, a second-floor unit he jokingly calls the penthouse. When she enters the darkened room, she's not greeted by her boyfriend, but by a floating, spectral visage. It is a rotting green face, one eye wide with fear, the other squeezed shut in a leer, lips pulled back to reveal snaggle teeth. It is a cheap, glow-in-the-dark Halloween mask, but in the darkness, it provokes a primal terror in Sarah. When the lights flicker on, the monster vanishes, replaced by Johnny's smiling blue eyes. He is the benign Dr. Jekyll to the mask's Mr. Hyde, a juxtaposition that Stephen King uses to subtly foreshadow the fracturing of identity that defines the story to come. Johnny Smith is a man of gentle contradictions. To his students at Cleves Mills High, He is Frankenstein due to his height and loping walk, yet he commands a natural, effortless respect. Sarah, conversely, struggles with the freshman teacher demon of discipline, hiding her beauty behind severe buns and glasses. She observes Johnny with a mixture of affection and perplexity. He is ordinary, almost aggressively so, yet he possesses an innate charisma that defies his slacker exterior. As they prepare to leave for the county fair in Este, the absolute last agricultural fair of the New England season, Sarah reflects on her romantic history. Her internal monologue reveals the scars of a previous relationship with a man named Dan, a volatile, sexually dominant figure who eventually flunked out and was drafted into the war. Sarah realizes she has been carrying the emotional weight of that relationship like a beast of burden unaware of its own load. Johnny is the antidote to Dan, safe, funny and kind. He is a town donkey with only a saddle, unburdened by the heavy packs of trauma. The couple drives into the chill October night, the atmosphere thick with the sensory details of a small-town carnival. The smell of frying onions and cotton candy, the rumble of the Wild Mouse coaster, and the tinny blare of rock and roll mixing with calliope music. It is a scene of Americana on the precipice of decay. They ride the whip, where Johnny jokes about a hairline fracture, and the Ferris wheel, where they share kisses high above the neon sprawl. It is a perfect quintessential date night, the kind of calm that often precedes a storm in horror fiction. They eventually drift toward the midway as the crowds thin and the lights dim. They stop at the Wheel of Fortune. It is here that the tone of the evening shifts from romantic nostalgia to something colder and more precise. Johnny, possessing only a handful of dollars, decides to play. He claims to feel lucky. This is the pivotal moment where the dormant power within Johnny, the dead zone, begins to leak through, catalyzed by the spinning wheel. He bets on black, then on specific number ranges. He wins. He bets again. He wins again. The pitchman, a seasoned grifter accustomed to the house always winning, becomes increasingly agitated. The odds of the wheel are stacked mathematically against the player, yet Johnny navigates them with a somnambulistic certainty. As the wins pile up, Johnny's behavior changes. He begins to rub his forehead, a physical tic that signals the onset of his clairvoyant headaches, though neither he nor Sarah understands this yet. His eyes go distant, dark, and detached. He is no longer guessing. He is knowing. Sarah, standing beside him, begins to feel physically ill. The narrative suggests a psychosomatic link, as if the violation of probability is creating a nausea in the air itself. The crowd swells, drawn by the scent of a hot stick. Johnny continues to press his luck, defying the pleas of the pitchman and the warnings of bystanders. He places a massive bet on the number 19. The wheel spins, the wooden clapper counting down the decay of momentum. It teeters on the edge, defying physics, before settling into the slot. Johnny wins again. He has turned a pocketful of change into over $500, a significant sum in 1970. The victory is not triumphant, it is unsettling. Johnny stares at the wheel with the cold curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen, while Sarah fights the urge to vomit. The pitchman, defeated and angry, is forced to pay out from a hidden lockbox, shamed by a burly bystander into honoring the bet. Johnny accepts the money with an eerie indifference, remarking that found money brings bad luck, a phrase echoing his religious mother's fatalistic worldview. The scene concludes with Sarah violently retching behind a light pole, purging the bad hot dog, which serves as a metaphor for the indigestible reality of what just occurred. The night has curdled. The innocence of the fair is gone, replaced by a sick, slick feeling of wrongness. As they walk back to the car, a teenager passes them, grinning and saying he loved seeing the pitchman take a beating. In the safety of the car, with the heater driving away the October chill, the supernatural tension recedes slightly, leaving behind a raw, emotional vulnerability. Johnny drives, the illicit winnings stuffed in his pocket, and tells Sarah he loves her. It is a moment of genuine connection, yet it is framed by the shadow of the mask and the impossible spin of the wheel. They are two ordinary people driving home in the dark, unaware that the mechanism of their fate has already been set in motion, and that the number 19 was not a gift, but a warning. Chapter 2. The prelude to tragedy often masquerades as a quiet, mundane ending to a frantic night. It is nearly midnight when Johnny Smith maneuvers the station wagon into Sarah's driveway, the carnival lights of the county fair now just a memory in the rearview mirror. Sarah is unwell, the victim of a bad concession stand hot dog, shivering in the grip of food poisoning. There is a tenderness here, a gentle intimacy as Johnny helps her inside, but propriety and the fear of small-town gossip keeps him from staying the night. He is a man of his time, concerned that his car parked outside her apartment till dawn would tarnish her reputation. It is a decision that hangs heavy with dramatic irony. Had he stayed, the timeline of his life would have remained unbroken. Inside her apartment, amidst the psychedelic curtains and posters of Dylan and Baez that mark her as a member of the younger, progressive generation, Sarah attempts to recover. But the conversation turns to the unnatural luck Johnny displayed at the Wheel of Fortune. Sarah confesses that his winning streak wasn't just impressive, it was uncanny, bordering on frightening. Here we see the first true manifestation of Johnny's latent ability, a shine that predates his injury. He admits to having feelings since childhood, recounting a lost class ring he located for a girl named Lisa Schumann simply by guessing. But the wheel triggered something darker. Johnny describes a sensory hallucination that assaulted him while he played, the smell of burning rubber, the biting cold of black ice, and a profound sense of doom. This is a temporal echo, a psychic bleed-through where the future is haunting the present. He dismisses it as a fluke, but the dread lingers. Before he leaves to catch his cab, Sarah confesses she loves him. It is the highest emotional peak of their relationship, and tragically, it serves as the final words she will speak to him for years. Johnny enters the taxi, and the narrative shifts into the claustrophobic interior of the cab. The driver is a man of the old guard, bitter and confused by the counterculture youth, complaining about his son who calls the president a pig. There is a stark generational clash here. The teacher who empathizes with the youth, and the driver who feels alienated by them. Neither knows that their philosophical differences are about to be rendered moot by physics. As they cruise past the dark woods and the oily flow of the Penobscot River, Johnny's mind keeps snagging on the vision of the wheel and the phantom scent of burnt rubber. The premonition manifests in reality. Two cars, a Mustang and a Charger, are drag racing over the crest of a hill. They are playing a game of chicken with the road, and the taxi loses. The collision is catastrophic. The Charger slams head-on into the cab. In the violence of the impact, Johnny is launched through the windshield, his body defying gravity in a grotesque flight into the October night. He lands in the cold wetness of a bog, far from the burning pyre of twisted metal that claims the lives of the cabbie and the teenager in the other car. As Johnny's consciousness fades, the universe reduces itself to that spinning wheel of fortune. It clicks past the numbers, red and black, revolving in the void between stars. He waits for it to land, but there is only the darkness of the 00. The house always wins. Johnny Smith enters the long silence. Chapter 3. The horror of a late-night phone call lies in its disruption of the sanctuary of sleep. At 2 a.m., the phone rings in the Smith household. We are introduced to Herb and Vera Smith, and immediately the fault lines in their marriage are exposed. Herb is pragmatic, annoyed by the modern indignity of being put on hold. Vera, however, is brittle, her mind already fracturing under the weight of a fervent, almost manic religiosity. When the state police deliver the news that Johnny is in critical condition, the reaction splits down the middle. Herb is stunned into a doughy silence, trying to process the mechanical facts of a car crash. Vera, however, collapses into prayer. But this isn't standard grief. It is a performance of hysteria, where she views the accident not as a random event, but as a divine judgment on sin. She babbles about death traps and the wrath of God, forcing Herb to suppress her hysteria just to get information. This dynamic is crucial. Herb looks for medical answers, Vera looks for theological ones. Sarah receives the news the next morning from a colleague. The reality of the crash, the death of the students, the destruction of the cab, shatters her world. When she arrives at Eastern Maine Medical, she finds the parents in the waiting room. The meeting is strained. Vera, clutching her Bible, immediately treats Sarah with suspicion, viewing the carnival they attended as a den of iniquity. To Vera, the sinful place is the cause of the tragedy, a direct causal link between a game of chance and God's hammer. Herb acts as the buffer, a tired man trying to mediate between his wife's fanaticism and the girl who loves his son. The prognosis, delivered by a weary Dr. Strauns, is grim. Johnny has suffered a massive subdural hematoma, bleeding in the brain. He is in a deep coma. The doctor offers no false hope. Death is the likely outcome, and if not death, a permanent vegetative state. In the face of this scientific hopelessness, Vera Smith's mind snaps fully into its own reality. She rejects the medical diagnosis in favor of a divine one. She claims God has spoken to her, that Johnny is marked for a purpose. Her beliefs, we learn, are a strange cocktail of fundamentalist Christianity and fringe theories involving UFOs and Atlantis. She speaks of the rapture, believing the faithful will be taken up in flying saucers. It is a defense mechanism of the highest order. If Johnny is part of a cosmic plan, then his suffering is not random, and he cannot die. As the days turn into weeks, Sarah returns to her routine, but the world has turned grey. The students at school treat her like a tragic widow. The love she declared to Johnny hangs in the void, unanswered. Herb and Vera return home, their savings draining away to keep their son's body alive. Standing alone in the hospital parking lot, Sarah looks up at the moon, which hangs like a tawdry carnival prize. She realizes that the game is rigged. The wheel has spun, and for Johnny Smith, it has stopped on a space that is neither life nor death, but a long, dark pause in the dead zone. Chapter 4. The narrative shifts now, descending into a mind that is festering, dark, and terribly purposeful. It is November 12th, 1970. In the biting cold of a Castle Rock park, a man sits on a bench. He considers himself slick. This is the armor he wears against the world, an internal mantra of invincibility. He smokes and hums a tune from the Beatles, back in the USSR, the melody looping in his head like a broken record. We are witnessing the birth of a serial killer, or rather, the graduation of one. He hasn't killed yet, not technically, but the act has been incubating in his psyche for years, an itch that has finally become an imperative. He feels a manic optimism. He isn't afraid of capture, and significantly, he isn't afraid of the clothespin anymore. This specific fear is the key to his pathology, a traumatic totem from his childhood. As he scans the dead, yellowed grass of the town common, awaiting the cover of winter, we are given a glimpse into the origin of his madness. It stems from the matriarch. He remembers being 7 years old, caught by his mother in an innocent act of self-exploration. She didn't just scold him, she destroyed him. She introduced him to the concept of the nasty fucker, a term dripping with sexual revulsion and disease. She terrified him with threats of rot and decay, then punished him with a clothespin, inflicting physical pain to anchor the psychological shame. That trauma split his mind. It created the slick killer who now sits in the park, ready to punish the nasty fuckers of the world. The target arrives. It is Alma Frechette, a waitress coming off her shift. The killer knows her. He has dated her. In his twisted moral calculus, her sexuality, her dyed hair, her dancing, marks her for death. He lures her to the deserted bandstand with a promise of showing her something strange. He is charming, disarming. The mask of sanity is firmly in place. On the bandstand, surrounded by the debris of illicit nighttime trysts, he shows her a used condom. When Alma recoils, offended and frightened, the trap snaps shut. She tries to flee, but he is faster. He validates his own slickness by overpowering her. As he attacks, the past merges with the present. He reclaims the power his mother stole from him. He names her a nasty fucker, projecting his own internalized self-loathing onto his victim. He strangles her, the violence sexualized and brutal, until the light leaves her eyes. He leaves her violated body on the bandstand, exposed to the white sky. The town will blame a drifter for the atrocity, unable to conceive that such darkness lives among them. But the killer knows better. He is slick. Chapter 5. While one monster is born in Castle Rock, the tragedy of Johnny Smith continues to ripple outward, eroding the lives of those who loved him. We move through time now, watching the slow attrition of hope. Herb and Vera Smith return to Pownell, but their life is fractured. Their savings evaporate, forcing the proud Herb to accept state welfare, a humiliation that ages him as much as his grief. But the true deterioration is found in Vera. She retreats into a world of religious fanaticism, subscribing to poorly printed magazines about UFOs and psychic miracles. This is her coping mechanism, a desperate attempt to find a cosmic reason for her son's tragedy. She becomes prey for charlatans, sending money she doesn't have to radio evangelists and buying holy trinkets, convinced that faith, not medicine, will wake Johnny. Herb fights a losing battle against her delusion, watching his wife drift away into a sea of irrationality. Sarah Bracknell is also drifting, but in a limbo of suspended time. The world marches on without Johnny. The Vietnam War rages, Nixon bombs Hanoi, and hemlines change. But for Sarah, these are distant echoes. She reads about coma patients finding horror stories of men who withered away over decades, their brains smoothing out into blank slates. It is a terrifying prospect, the idea that Johnny is de-evolving, becoming a fetus trapped in amber. Despite her grief, life demands she move forward. As 1970 bleeds into 1971, the letters from Herb become less frequent, signaling a tacit permission for her to let go. She begins to date, hesitantly at first. She meets Walter Hazlitt, a law student. He reminds her of Johnny initially, a painful echo, but eventually he becomes his own person in her eyes. She is drowning in daze, and Walt offers a lifeline. Meanwhile, in New Hampshire, another force is gathering strength. It is the summer of 1971. Greg Stillson has evolved. No longer just a traveling Bible salesman with a violent streak. He's now a local businessman, building a power base in the small town of Ridgeway. We see him in his back office, confronting a massive biker named Sonny Ellerman. This scene reveals the terrifying duality of Stillson. To the public, he is a civic leader, a JC, a man who solves problems. In private, he is a dangerous psychopath. He blackmails the biker not with the law, but with sheer, unpredictable intimidation. He throws a vase past Sonny's head, switching instantly from calm to violent, throwing the massive biker off balance. Stillson recruits Sonny, sensing a future need for muscle. He talks of destiny, of the sky being the limit. He is a man who believes his own mythology, a mouse pulling the thorn from the lion's paw, waiting for the favor to be returned. He is calculating, charismatic, and utterly unhinged, a dark reflection of the American dream. Time accelerates. 1972 arrives. Nixon is re-elected. Sarah marries Walt. At her wedding, she has a sudden, horrifying vision of Johnny, not as the gentleman she loved, but as the snarling, dark-eyed figure from the Wheel of Fortune. It is a psychic scar, a reminder that the dead zone is never far away. Herb attends the wedding alone. Vera is gone, chasing the apocalypse on a farm in Vermont with a UFO cult, convinced the end times are near. The years grind on. 1973, 1974. Johnny sleeps. His body curls tighter, assuming the fetal position Sarah feared. The doctors who originally treated him move on or die. The seasons turn. A lightning rod salesman visits a roadhouse, offering protection from the wrath of God, but is laughed away, a subtle metaphor for the randomness of fate. Disaster strikes when you least expect it, and no one buys insurance until the house is already burning. Vera returns home, her apocalypse postponed, but her madness deepening. She now believes Christ will emerge from the South Pole. Herb, broken and aging, finally snaps when he discovers Vera trying to donate their furniture to yet another cult. It is a heartbreaking confrontation. The man who just wanted a simple life is forced to draw a hard line against the woman he loves, whose mind has been shattered by grief. In late 1974, Sarah gives birth to a son, Dennis. She has built a new life, a fortress of normalcy over the ruins of the past. But the past is not done with any of them. It is New Year's Day, 1975. Two young boys are playing in the woods near the border of Castle Rock, in a scene that mirrors the innocence of childhood shattered by the reality of evil. A snowball fight leads to a grim discovery. Down by the brook, protruding from the melting snow, is a frozen hand. It is the body of a missing teenager, Carol Dunbarger. The silence of the last 2 years was a lie. The Castle Rock strangler has not vanished. He was merely dormant. As the boys scream in the winter woods, the town's nightmare resumes. The slick killer is still out there, and while Johnny Smith sleeps in his hospital bed, the darkness is waking up. Chapter 6. The narrative shifts to the sterile, fluorescent reality of the Eastern Maine Medical Center. It is winter, fierce and biting, freezing the world outside, while inside, the hospital operates on its own delayed rhythm. Here, we see the stark contrast between the mundane and the miraculous. In room 619, a heart attack patient named Mr. Starrett is recovering. To him, the man in the next bed, John Smith, is little more than a biological machine, a living corpse, whose respirator whispers a constant, maddening reminder of mortality. It is a grim psychological setting. The living are annoyed by the presence of those suspended in the void. An aide, Allison, tends to them. While Starrett complains about his yogurt and the weather, the narrative subtly shifts focus to the comatose man. There is a minute change, a straightening of the body. The medical staff calls his posture prefetal, a term that suggests a regression to a state before birth, which is thematically potent here. Johnny isn't just sleeping, he's waiting to be born again. Allison notices the shift, a tiny crack in the ice of his 4.5-year slumber, but she says nothing. It is the silence before the thunderclap. Inside Johnny's mind, we traverse a landscape of pure nightmare. King often uses the architecture of the mind to represent the coma, and here it manifests as a dark, chromed hallway. This is a place of limbo. Johnny is haunted by a spectral voice, the last thing he heard before the crash, the cab driver ranting about his son and politics. It's a loop of psychic debris, a trapped memory echoing in the hollow steel of his unconsciousness. The psychological journey here is profound. Johnny finds himself at a crossroads in this grey, misty purgatory. He senses the wheel of fortune turning, red and black, life and death. He is faced with a choice: retreat into the dark hallway, which represents death or eternal coma, or step through a membrane into a room of light. The horror lies in the intuition that stepping into the light brings sorrow and bad times. His subconscious knows that waking up is the harder path. Yet the memory of Sarah anchors him. Love becomes the tether pulling him out of the abyss. He chooses the light, turning his back on the dark eternity, effectively rebirthing himself into a world that has moved on without him. When Johnny finally opens his eyes, the date is May 17th, 1975. The tragedy is immediate. He believes only days have passed. He speaks to the empty room, his voice a rusted croak, unaware that he has lost nearly half a decade of his prime. When the nurse, Marie, enters, the supernatural element bleeds into the clinical setting. Johnny speaks her name without being told. This isn't just observation, it is an intrusion. He sees her, and suddenly he knows her. The horror mounts as he looks around the room, the yellowed picture of Jesus, the curling leaves of a plant. These are symbols of time's decay. Panic sets in. He demands his get-well cards, his mind unable to grasp the silence of years. Dr. Brown arrives, skeptical and scientific, trying to rationalize Johnny's awakening. But then the shine, or the dead zone ability, manifests violently. Johnny looks at Marie and casually mentions that her son, Mark, will be fine once his eye operation is done. The staff is frozen. This is the first instance of his new reality. Information comes to him not through logic, but through a sudden, total knowing. The climax of the chapter occurs when Dr. Brown tries to soothe him. Johnny grabs the doctor's hand. The contact triggers a psychic circuit. Johnny touches a blue felt-tip pen, a flare, and the tactile sensation rips the veil away. He doesn't just feel the plastic, he feels the weight of time. The knowledge crashes down on him, 55 months. The horror of the Rip Van Winkle archetype is fully realized here. He is 27 years old. He has been robbed of his life. Dr. Brown, conversely, feels a wave of revulsion, a primal instinct warning him that he has been touched by something unnatural. Meanwhile, we cut to Johnny's parents, Herb and Vera. The dynamic is heartbreaking. Herb has been grieving a living death, praying for an end to the suffering. Vera, however, has descended into religious fanaticism. She has ceased to be a mother in the traditional sense and has become a zealot, viewing Johnny's coma as part of a divine plan. When the phone rings, her reaction is one of terrifying vindication. She screams of miracles, while Herb tries to maintain a grip on reality. This establishes the new domestic horror Johnny will face. A mother who views him as a messianic figure rather than a traumatized son. The reunion is bittersweet. Johnny is emaciated, his muscles atrophied, a physical ruin. When his parents arrive, he sees the toll of time on their faces. Vera immediately frames his awakening as a conversion, ignoring his pain in favor of her theology. Herb, the tragic pragmatist, has to deliver the final crushing blow. He reveals that Sarah didn't wait. She is married to a lawyer and has a child. Johnny is left with the physical bitterness of ginger ale and the emotional bitterness of a life that continued without him. Chapter 7. We move from the emotional fallout to the clinical investigation of Johnny's altered brain. Dr. Wyzak, a neurologist with a flamboyant appearance that belies his brilliance, conducts an EEG. This scene is crucial for establishing the rules of Johnny's power and the concept of the dead zone. As Wyzak asks Johnny to visualize simple objects, an orange, a TV, Johnny succeeds. But when asked to visualize a picnic table or a rowboat, his mind hits a blank wall. He sees unrelated images, a hammock, a beach ball. These are the dead zones in his neural pathways, microscopic areas of brain damage caused by the accident. It's a fascinating inversion. The injury that caused the gaps in his memory is likely the same injury that opened the floodgates to his psychic ability. The tension escalates when Johnny asks about his prognosis. Wyzak is honest about the physical agony ahead, the shortened ligaments, the surgeries, the therapy. But the narrative quickly pivots from the medical to the metaphysical. Johnny feels a compulsion to touch Wyzak. It's an addiction to the information flow. He grabs the doctor's hand, and the text explodes into a stream of consciousness nightmare. This is Stephen King at his most visceral. The contact plunges Johnny into Wyzak's past. He sees World War II, the invasion of Poland, tanks, and death. The writing style mimics the chaotic rush of a vision, fragmented, sensory, and overwhelming. Johnny reveals a shocking truth. Wyzak's mother did not die in the war. The vision is specific and terrifying. Johnny describes the mother being hit by a German troop truck, her survival, her amnesia, and her new life as Johanna Borrance in California. He recites a Polish cradle song, a language he does not know. The psychic flash is not just visual, it is auditory and emotional. He feels the mother's longing for her lost son, her subconscious thought that the boy is safe. The reaction in the room is one of scientific dismantling. Dr. Brown tries to stop it, terrified by the impossible. Wyzak, however, is stunned into silence. The specific details, the blue flare pen earlier, and now the survival of a woman thought dead for decades, shatter their materialist worldview. Johnny explains that the information about the mother's location is partly obscured by a dead zone, just like the picnic table. He can see she is in Carmel, but the street address is lost in the static of his injury. The chapter ends on a note of crushing reality. The adrenaline of the psychic event fades, leaving Johnny physically helpless. He is wheeled down for more tests, where his body betrays him completely. He loses bladder control, reverting to an infantile state. The humiliation is total. He lies in the dark, soaking in his own urine, overwhelmed by depression. The contrast is sharp and cruel. He possesses a mind capable of transcending time and space, yet he is trapped in a body that cannot even perform its most basic functions. He turns his face to the wall, wishing for death, the sleep to lure, becoming a waking nightmare of loss. Chapter 8. The road back from the void is not paved with triumph, but with confusion and the grinding friction of a world that refused to wait. As Johnny Smith lays in his hospital bed, the reality of his lost years begins to settle in, not as a mathematical fact, but as a suffocating emotional weight. His parents visit, but the dynamic has shifted into something brittle and strange. Vera, his mother, is no longer just eccentric. She has calcified into a manic religious zealot. She leaves bundles of tracts, her conversation laced with aggressive piety. She insists on staying, on explaining God's plan. But Johnny, still wrestling with the black residue of depression, knows that her brand of comfort would only drive him to hysterical, cynical laughter. He needs to walk before he can pray. There is a tragic irony here. The accident that broke Johnny's body seems to have broken his mother's mind, twisting her maternal love into a fanaticism that views his coma not as a medical catastrophe, but as a divine pause. Johnny, however, is grounded in the mundane and the political. He asks his father, Herb, about the world. The answers are disorienting blows. Nixon is gone, not defeated, but resigned in disgrace. Agnew is out. The war in Vietnam, the backdrop of Johnny's entire young adulthood, is over. The country folded up like a window shade. The cultural landscape has shifted so violently that Johnny feels less like a miracle and more like a relic, a Rip Van Winkle waking up to a terrifyingly unfamiliar America. Later that night, the darkness of the ward brings a different kind of revelation. Dr. Wyzak, the neurologist who has become Johnny's anchor, visits him in the shadows. This interaction marks a pivotal shift in the narrative's psychological landscape, the transition from medical anomaly to supernatural reality. Wyzak admits he made the call to Carmel, California. He dialed the number Johnny gave him, a number Johnny couldn't possibly have known. Wyzak confirms it. A young man answered. Then, a woman, his mother. The woman Wyzak believed had died in the ashes of Warsaw 35 years ago. The scientific mind of the doctor collides with the inexplicable data before him. He didn't speak to her. He only listened, paralyzed by the vertigo of the impossible, and then hung up. Wyzak poses a profound moral question here, one that underscores the burden of Johnny's emerging ability. He chose not to disturb his mother's new life, deciding that her peace was more valuable than his closure. He warns Johnny, invoking the spirit of the monkey's paw. Some things, he suggests, are better lost than found. This isn't just advice. It is a foreshadowing of the isolation Johnny faces. Wyzak lists the phenomena: telepathy, precognition, second sight, but refuses to label Johnny. He leaves him with the heavy realization that Dr. Brown, the other specialist, is reacting with hostility and denial, while the nurses are already whispering. Johnny is no longer just a patient. He is becoming a phenomenon. Chapter 9. If the previous events were a psychological assault, what follows is physical brutality. The narrative does not shy away from the visceral horror of medical reconstruction. Johnny is scheduled for surgery to lengthen the tendons in his legs, a procedure requiring a local anesthetic that leaves him conscious of the violence being done to his body. He is, as Wyzak bluntly puts it, a guinea pig. Dr. Ropp, a visiting superstar surgeon, views Johnny not as a man, but as a fascinating biological puzzle to be solved for a medical journal. The surgery is a nightmare of clinical detachment and sensory overload. Johnny, high on Demerol but still tethered to reality, watches in a convex mirror as they cut into him. The descriptions are grotesque: wire bundles, clamps, the visual of spaghetti sauce inside his own legs. It emphasizes the dehumanization of the patient. He is meat being rewired. Post-operation, the pain is absolute. It is a nail-studded agony that stretches seconds into hours. In the depths of this suffering, Johnny loses the will to be special or miraculous. He just wants to be left alone or dead. He wets himself, crying in humiliation, stripped of all dignity. This is the valley of the shadow of death, stripped of any psalm-like comfort. Into this atmosphere of pain and regression walks Sarah. Her visit is the emotional crescendo of his recovery, yet it is laced with the bitter poison of lost time. She is beautiful, dressed in linen, married, and a mother. She is everything Johnny lost. The conversation is a minefield of awkwardness and unsaid regrets. Sarah admits she couldn't wait, that the hopelessness was too great, and Johnny, with heartbreaking grace, absolves her of guilt. He tells her she did the right thing, but the connection between them, that electric wire of intimacy, hasn't been fully cut. Then the dead zone manifests. It happens casually, almost accidentally. Johnny mentions that she didn't leave her wedding ring in Montreal, as she thought. He enters a trance state, his eyes darkening, his personality shifting from the warm Johnny to something cold and distant. He sees the past with frightening clarity. He tells her the ring was too big, so she put it in the side pocket of a suitcase, the third one, and forgot it. He describes the scene perfectly, down to the whoopee cushions her husband was buying. Sarah is terrified. This isn't a parlor trick. It's a violation of the natural order. She flees the hospital and vomits, a physical rejection of the unnatural thing Johnny has become. Later, at home, the horror is confirmed. She checks the suitcase in the attic. The ring is there. The psychological implication here is devastating. Sarah realizes that Johnny knows things he cannot know, that he is touching a world that should remain hidden. Her reaction is one of self-preservation. She takes the ring, the symbol of her marriage found through clairvoyance, and flushes it down the toilet. It is a desperate attempt to wash away the weirdness, to reject the supernatural intrusion into her safe domestic life. She chooses her reality over his. Chapter 10. Time moves forward, but the shadows around Johnny lengthen. It is the summer of 1975. Johnny's physical rehabilitation is grueling, a battle for every inch of movement. But the battle for his mother's life is being lost. Vera Smith has stopped taking her blood pressure medication, fully surrendering to her religious fatalism. She believes her survival, like Johnny's, is entirely up to God, rejecting the devil's meddling of doctors. The friction between mother and son escalates. Johnny, exhausted and cynical, snaps at her. He argues that God helps those who help themselves, but Vera is immovable. She is preparing for the end times, consuming apocalyptic literature that paints the world in strokes of fire and judgment. Johnny realizes with a heavy, sinking certainty that she is going to die soon. This knowledge isn't necessarily psychic. It's the logical conclusion of watching a loved one choose delusion over medicine. Yet the psychic hits keep coming, validating the whispers in the hospital. Marie Michaud, a nurse, comes to Johnny in tears of joy. Her son's eye surgery was a success, exactly as Johnny had predicted when the doctors were unsure. He tries to downplay it, terrified of the responsibility, but the accuracy of his vision is undeniable. Reality tries to assert itself in mundane ways. Dave Pelson, a colleague from his teaching days, visits. He offers Johnny a job for the second semester. It's a lifeline to normalcy, a chance to be Johnny the teacher again instead of Johnny the freak. Johnny accepts tentatively, desperate for money and a return to the ordinary world. But the ordinary world is becoming increasingly fragile around him. The breaking point comes in the physical therapy room. Johnny is working with Eileen McGowan, a tough, no-nonsense therapist who treats him like a Marine recruit. They are joking, sweating, doing sit-ups with a medicine ball. Then contact is made. As Johnny grabs her hand, the veil tears. His expression goes slack. His eyes drift into that faraway, dreamy contemplation that signals the onset of a vision. He tells her to call the fire department. He sees her kitchen. He sees the burner left on, the dish towel catching fire, the curtains igniting. Eileen is confused, then defensive, but Johnny's urgency overrides social convention. He forces the issue, dragging her to the nurses' station. The scene is public and humiliating. The nurses watch with the avid, cruel curiosity of crows on a wire. Johnny calls the fire department himself. He forces Eileen to call her neighbor. The confirmation is immediate. There is smoke pouring out of Eileen's window. The house is saved, but Johnny's anonymity is destroyed. The reaction of the hospital staff is the final nail in the coffin of his old life. Eileen looks at him with superstitious dread. The nurses stare, their whispers turning into a heavy, accusing silence. He isn't a hero who saved a house. He is a monstrosity who can see through walls. The isolation is total. Johnny limps away, physically broken and socially exiled, knowing that the rumors will now spread like a virus. He just wants to go to bed, but the waking nightmare is only just beginning. Chapter 11. The sanctuary of the hospital had been breached. For Johnny Smith, the waking world was proving to be far more treacherous than the dark, timeless coma he had inhabited for nearly 5 years. Dr. Sam Wyzak, the man who had become both physician and father figure, brought the news that the wolves were gathering in the lobby. Reporters, sensing blood in the water after the incident at Eileen McGowan's house, were demanding answers. Johnny's initial instinct was retreat, the fear that this media circus would upset his mother, whose fragile grip on reality was held together by religious fervor and the anticipation of a pilgrimage to California. But Wyzak offered a grim reality check. Silence would only breed rumors. To control the narrative, Johnny had to step into the light. There is a tragic irony here. Wyzak, a man of science, pushes Johnny toward the press to normalize the situation, unaware that he is uncorking a bottle that can never be resealed. They went down to the lobby, into the glare of television lights that felt less like fame and more like an interrogation. Johnny, frail and swimming in clothes that were now too big for his atrophied frame, looked less like a prophet and more like a victim. The interrogation began. Johnny tried to rationalize what had happened, describing it as a mere feeling that the stove was left on. He was trying to minimize the supernatural, desperate to be seen as ordinary. But the press, a collective beast of curiosity and skepticism, wouldn't let him off the hook. Roger Dussault, a reporter with the predatory instinct of a man looking to expose a fraud, stepped forward. He wasn't interested in vague feelings. He wanted a demonstration. Dussault produced a medallion on a gold chain, challenging Johnny to read it. The tension in the room shifted from curiosity to hostility. Johnny, backed into a corner, accepted the challenge not out of arrogance, but out of a desperate need to end the confrontation. He took the St. Christopher medal. The moment his skin made contact with the object, the physical world receded. This is the mechanism of the dead zone. Touch is the conduit, the lightning rod that grounds the vision. Johnny's voice changed. It wasn't just a recounting of facts, it was a possession. He began to speak in the voice of a teenager, channeling a ghost. He spoke of Terry, Dussault's sister. He spoke of Lisbon Street, of boys, and then, brutally, of the darkness. He spoke of the drugs, speed, meth, and the heart attack that claimed her at 27. He revealed that Dussault, the skeptic, was the one haunted, the one who had been loved by a doomed girl. The devastation was absolute. Johnny snapped out of the trance to find Dussault broken, sobbing on the floor. The skepticism in the room evaporated, replaced by a cold, recoiling horror. Johnny tried to apologize, to offer comfort, but the reaction from the crowd was telling. A TV reporter backed away, pleading with Johnny not to touch him. In that moment, Johnny Smith ceased to be a medical miracle and became a pariah. He had stripped a man's soul bare in public. The gift was not a blessing, it was a violation. Back in the safety of his room, the true cost of the evening arrived via telephone. Johnny's father, Herb, was on the line. The news had traveled faster than Johnny could have imagined. His mother, Vera, had been watching the broadcast. The shock of seeing her son displaying what she believed to be divine power had triggered a massive stroke. Johnny's laughter in the hospital room, a high, jagged sound, was the sound of a mind cracking under the weight of cosmic cruelty. He had used his power to prove he wasn't a fraud, and in doing so, he had struck down the person he loved most. Chapter 12. The drive from the Eastern Maine Medical Center to Cumberland General was a fugue state. Dr. Wysack drove, ferrying his patient through the summer night, but Johnny was drifting through a landscape of guilt. The sedatives Wysack administered pulled Johnny into a nightmare that revealed the terrifying landscape of his subconscious. He dreamed of his mother, not as the dying woman she was, but as a beggar and a zealot crawling toward him. She demanded to be healed, screaming, "Saved, Savior," as she led a legion of the broken and the damned. This dream sequence is crucial. It manifests Johnny's deepest fear. He sees the gift not as a superpower, but as a parasitic burden that will draw the desperate to him until he is consumed. He isn't a hero in his own mind. He is a reluctant vessel for a power he doesn't understand. When they arrived at the hospital, the reality was stark. Herb Smith, wearing pajama tops and old trousers, was a diminished figure, a man whose world was dissolving. Johnny went to his mother's room. Vera Smith was a ruin, her face twisted by the stroke, one eye staring wildly while the other remained frozen. But her mind, warped by religious fanaticism, was razor-sharp in its delusion. She didn't blame him. To her, the broadcast was confirmation. She saw her son as an instrument of God, a modern-day prophet. Her dying words were not of comfort, but of command. She told him not to run from God, not to hide like Jonah. "Do your duty, John," she rasped. It was a heavy, terrifying bequest. She died shortly after, leaving Johnny with a mandate he never asked for. The tragedy here is twofold. He blames himself for her death, while she dies believing her death is simply part of God's plan to reveal her son's power. She binds him to a destiny of duty that will haunt every choice he makes from this moment on. Chapter 13. While Johnny Smith was drowning in grief in Maine, a different kind of darkness was rising in New Hampshire. The narrative shifts sharply to Greg Stillson, a man who represents the polar opposite of Johnny's reluctant, accidental power. Stillson is a force of calculated malice. We find Stillson in the back room of a police station, tormenting a college student who had the misfortune of wearing a t-shirt with an obscene slogan. Stillson, a rising political figure, is not acting out of moral outrage, but out of a psychotic need for dominance. He burns the shirt, but that is just the opening act. He shatters a Pepsi bottle and uses the jagged glass to terrorize the boy. This scene is a masterclass in psychological horror. Stillson operates behind a mask of folksy, reasonable authority, Mayor Stillson, but beneath it lies a volatile, violent sociopath. He forces the terrified boy to humiliate himself, to admit he is the asshole, and to pledge fealty to Stillson. He threatens to kill the boy if he ever speaks of this, and the threat is entirely credible. Unlike Johnny, who accidentally hurts people by revealing the truth, Stillson uses pain and fear to enforce silence and submission. The dead zone in Johnny's brain lets the future in. The dead zone in Stillson's soul lets no humanity out. Meanwhile, back in Bangor, the ripples of Johnny's public exposure reach Sarah Hazlitt. Domestic life with her husband Walt was a safe, structured cage. Walt read the newspaper account of Johnny's press conference with cynicism, dismissing it as a gimmick, a way to pay off hospital bills. He represents the rational world that refuses to accept the impossible. Sarah, however, knew better. She defended Johnny, insisting he doesn't lie, but she couldn't tell Walt the whole truth, that she had visited Johnny, that he had found her lost wedding ring through a vision, and that she had flushed that ring down the toilet in a fit of terrified denial. The ring in the sewer is a potent symbol of her buried feelings and the secret knowledge she carries. When the news of Vera Smith's death broke over the radio, Sarah tried to reach out. calling the hospital only to find Johnny had already checked out. She was left alone in her kitchen, the sound of a crying child and running water filling the silence, caught between the safe life she chose and the doomed man she left behind. The lines of fate were being drawn, connecting a grieving psychic, a sociopathic politician, and the woman who loved them both, all moving inexorably toward a collision. Chapter 14. October arrives in Maine, bringing with it the rusted gold of dying leaves and a distinct chill in the air, a mirror to the hardening of Johnny Smith's own spirit. He is recovering, his body knitting itself back together through sheer force of will. The quarter-mile walk to the mailbox, once an agonizing marathon that left him trembling, has become a ritual of strength. He splits wood now, reclaiming the physical power that the coma stole from him. But while his muscles regenerate, his peace of mind is under constant siege. The mailbox is the enemy. It is a conduit for the world's madness, overflowing with the desperate, the devout, and the deranged. Johnny has become a lightning rod for humanity's obsession with the unknown. He receives letters addressed to the prophet, demands for miracles, and hate mail accusing him of being the Antichrist. But the worst are the objects. People send him their talismans of grief, scarves, lipsticks, toys, accompanied by a single screaming demand. Tell me. They want to know where the missing bodies are buried. They want confirmation of infidelities. They want him to touch their relics and play God. Johnny tries to ignore them, but the psychic tactile sense is a trap he cannot always avoid. One specific item, a simple knitted scarf, breaks through his defenses. It belongs to a missing man, and the moment Johnny touches it, the comfortable reality of his father's porch vanishes. He is plunged into a nightmare of sensory overload. The smell of swamp water, the buzzing of insects, and the terrifying, suffocating reality of quicksand. In the vision, he isn't watching a movie. He is the dying man, struggling in the mud, screaming as the earth swallows him whole, while a squirrel watches indifferently. The horror of this vision, the knowledge that the man didn't just vanish but died in agony, solidifies Johnny's resolve. He cannot be the oracle these people want. The truth offers no comfort, only the cold finality of death. He returns the objects. He offers no answers. But the vultures are circling. A car pulls into the driveway, carrying a man named Richard Dees from inside view, a tabloid that peddles misery and fabrication between advertisements for diet pills. Dees is the embodiment of modern cynicism, a man who dyes his hair and wears a frantic city energy like a cheap suit. He thinks he can buy Johnny. He offers a contract, $30,000 a year to be a staff psychic, to predict disasters and validate the paranoid fantasies of 3 million readers. Dees explains the game with sickening candor. If Johnny can't see the future, he can just lie. To Dees, Johnny is not a miracle or a tragedy. He is content. This is the moment Johnny Smith realizes he is no longer the passive victim of his accident. He is disgusted by the commodification of his trauma. When he grabs Dees, his hands are like iron. The months of rehabilitation have given him a formidable grip. He physically manhandles the reporter, shaking him like a rag doll and kicking him off the property. It is a violent rejection of the freak show narrative. As Dees drives away, screaming threats and vowing to destroy Johnny's reputation, Johnny feels a throbbing headache, but also the grim satisfaction of a man defending his soul. Meanwhile, in New Hampshire, a different kind of monster is rising, not supernatural, but entirely human. Greg Stillson is making his move. He sits in the office of a local banker, Chuck Gendron, looking entirely out of place in his rough clothes. Gendron views Stillson as a local buffoon, a chaotic force useful for distracted amusement but certainly not serious politics. Gendron is wrong. Stillson is shedding his clown skin. He demands support for a run at the House of Representatives. When the banker laughs, Stillson reveals the darkness beneath the mask. He produces photographs, blackmail material of the banker in compromising sexual positions. The shift in power is instant and terrifying. Stillson preaches a chilling philosophy. When the winds of change blow, you don't build a windbreak, you build a windmill. He senses the political disillusionment of the era, the post-Watergate vacuum. He intends to fill it. While Johnny rejects power to save his integrity, Stillson uses extortion to seize it. The beast is hungry, and he has found his path to Washington. Chapter 15. The connection between Johnny and Sarah has never truly severed. It has only been stretched thin by the cruel intervention of fate. When she calls, asking to visit, Johnny knows he is playing with fire, but the pull of what might have been is too strong to resist. She arrives with her son, Denny. The presence of the child introduces a fascinating wrinkle in Johnny's psychic landscape. When he holds the baby, he braces for the dead zone or a flash of terrifying future. Instead, he feels nothing but warmth. The baby exists in a state of pure present tense, untainted by the dark currents of time that usually assault Johnny. It is a moment of profound peace, but the peace is fragile. Sarah admits the truth that has been unspoken since Johnny woke up. She still loves him. She is married to a good man, a man on his way up the political ladder, yet she is haunted by the ghost of the life she was supposed to have with Johnny. She proposes a cheat against fate. She wants to reclaim their lost intimacy, just once. It is a desperate attempt to put a period at the end of a sentence that was left hanging 5 years ago. They leave the baby napping on the porch and retreat to the barn. The setting is heavy with nostalgia, the smell of hay, the dust motes dancing in shafts of autumn light. It is a sanctuary out of time. Their union in the hayloft is not sordid. It is a ritual of grief and closure. They are trying to compress a lifetime of missing love into a single afternoon. It is bittersweet, driven by the knowledge that this is not a beginning, but an ending. They are saying goodbye to the ghosts of their younger selves. When they return to the house, the atmosphere has shifted. Johnny's father, Herb, is there. Herb is a simple man, but he possesses a quiet emotional intelligence. He sees the flush on their faces, the heaviness in the air. He watches them play with the baby, and surely understands that a silent tragedy has just played out under his roof. He does not judge. He simply participates in the charade of normalcy, helping to close the circle. Dinner is a quiet affair, filled with the mundane talk of politics and child-rearing, the very domesticity Johnny was denied. Sarah speaks of her husband's ambitions, unknowingly linking Johnny's world to the rising political tides that include men like Stillson. But for now, the focus is on the immediate loss. As evening falls, Sarah packs up to leave. The transaction is complete. They have had their stolen moment, and now the reality of their separate lives reasserts itself like a heavy door slamming shut. Johnny watches her red Pinto fade into the darkness, the tail lights disappearing down the road. There is no vision this time, no flash of the future, only the crushing weight of the present. He stands by the chopping block, the symbol of his reconstructed life, and feels a finality settle in his heart. He has survived the coma, he has survived the press, and now he has survived the heartbreak of letting Sarah go. He turns back to the empty house where his father waits, and the long, cold winter begins. Chapter 16. The winter of 1976 descended upon Maine with an early, suffocating weight, burying the landscape under 6 inches of snow by the first week of November. For Johnny Smith, however, the cold brought a semblance of peace. He was finally looking forward to a future that resembled normalcy. Lesson plans were being drawn, gum rubber boots were laced up, and a new apartment in Cleves awaited him. But peace, for a man who has touched the other side, is often fragile and temporary. The intrusion came not through a vision, but through the mail. An anonymous envelope delivered a clipping from Inside View, a tabloid rag that thrived on the sensational. The headline screamed of a hoax, claiming that the psychic John Smith of Pownall had admitted his powers were nothing more than a gimmick to pay hospital bills. It was a lie, a fabrication by a reporter named Dees. But as the snow drifted down around him, Johnny didn't feel anger. He felt relief. This is the paradox of Johnny's existence. To be truly free, he must be misunderstood. While his father, Herb, raged against the slander, wanting to sue for libel, Johnny saw the tabloid smear as a shield. If the world believed he was a charlatan, perhaps they would stop asking him to find lost wedding rings or predict lottery numbers. He wanted to bury the talent that had cost him so much of his life. Yet, the talent, or the curse, was still very much alive. Johnny confessed to his father about a recent dinner at Cole's farm. It wasn't just a meal. It was a bombardment of psychic noise. Touching a coat rack had unleashed a cascade of secrets, an affair, a brother's injury, a child's frustration over a radio. And then there was the black topcoat. Touching it felt like plunging his hand into a nest of writhing snakes, a tactile manifestation of a mind dissolving into paranoia. Johnny could still see into the hidden hearts of men, but he desperately wished to close his eyes. For a month, the tabloid article did its work. The fan mail turned to hate mail, then to silence. Johnny prepared for his return to teaching, believing he had successfully slipped back into the quiet stream of ordinary life. But destiny, particularly in Stephen King's universe, rarely allows for such clean escapes. The silence was broken by a telephone call from Castle Rock. The voice on the other end belonged to Sheriff George Bannerman. He had been given Johnny's number by Sam Wyzak, the neurologist who had guided Johnny through his awakening. The betrayal stung Johnny deeply. Wyzak, the man who had urged him to keep his head down, had now pointed the law directly at his doorstep. Bannerman was desperate. He was hunting a monster, a shadow that had haunted Castle County for years, the Castle Rock Strangler. But Johnny wanted no part of it. The trauma of his accident and the subsequent media circus had left him raw. He slammed the phone down, trembling with a mixture of fury and fear. In the solitude of his home, surrounded by the ghosts of his childhood embodied in fragile Christmas ornaments, Johnny wrestled with his fate. There is a profound psychological weight here as Johnny contemplates the ornaments, glass spheres that have outlived his mother and his own lost years. It highlights the absurdity of a universe where cheap decorations survive while human lives are shattered. He felt a resentment toward God, a deity he viewed not as a benevolent father, but as a cruel sportsman who had robbed him of his prime and left him with a painful, jagged gift. Driven by a morbid curiosity he couldn't suppress, Johnny dug through old newspapers in the woodshed. He reviewed the grim history of the Strangler. 5 women dead over 5 years, their bodies left in indignity, the crimes occurring in the dark trough of late autumn and early winter. The pattern suggested a manic-depressive cycle, a killer who rode the seasonal tides of madness. Guilt began to gnaw at him. He called Wyzak, intending to berate him, but found only a shared sorrow. Wyzak admitted his indiscretion, but spoke of the victims, the teacher stuffed into a culvert, the teenagers. The doctor's conscience had forced his hand. Johnny, despite his headache and his reluctance, realized he could not simply look away. The tipping point arrived via the evening news. A new victim had been found on the town common of Castle Rock. This time it was a 9-year-old girl named Mary Kate Henderson. Seeing the child's school photograph, her innocence frozen in time, shattered Johnny's resistance. The abstraction of police business became the concrete horror of a murdered child. He called Bannerman back. They met at John's restaurant in Bridgeton, a neutral ground between their two worlds, battered by a blizzard that mirrored the storm inside Johnny's head. Bannerman was a large man bearing the weight of his failing investigation and a bleeding ulcer. To prove that he wasn't the fraud the tabloids claimed, Johnny took Bannerman's hand. The connection was instantaneous and draining. Johnny saw the sheriff's aging Irish setter Rusty and knew the intimate struggle Bannerman faced in putting the dog down. Convinced, Bannerman opened up. The details of the crime were harrowing. The killer had waited on a bench in the town common, smoking Marlboros, watching children pass by as he waited for a solitary victim. The sheriff's own daughter, Katrina, had walked past that bench only minutes before the abduction. The proximity of the evil left Bannerman feeling unclean, as if he had brushed against a lethal current. The killer was a ghost. No fingerprints, no tracks on the frozen ground, no skin under the victim's fingernails. He was a void, careful and methodical. The only physical evidence was a crumpled cigarette box, likely handled with gloves. Johnny and Bannerman drove through the blinding snow to Castle Rock. The town was in a state of siege, reporters swarming the municipal building like vultures. When Johnny entered, the press recognized him immediately. The flashing cameras and shouted questions about the hoax stripped away his anonymity once again. He was no longer just a teacher. He was a spectacle. Inside the sheriff's office, Johnny met the exhausted deputies, including a young man named Frank Dodd. There is a tragic irony in this brief meeting, a heavy atmosphere of fatigue and hopelessness that hangs over the lawman. Dodd, dark-circled and defiant, seemed particularly consumed by the case, a detail that blends seamlessly into the background of the chaotic night. Bannerman produced the evidence, the empty Marlboro pack found near the bandstand. This was the moment of truth. Johnny took the object, holding it in his hands, waiting for the flash of insight, the psychic lightning that would illuminate the killer's face. He closed his eyes and reached out with his mind. But there was nothing. The dead zone asserted itself. It was a blank spot in the spectrum of his perception, a failure of conduction. The object was mute, offering no psychic residue to grasp. The killer remained faceless, a terrifying cipher. Defeated but not deterred, Johnny refused to give up. If the object wouldn't speak, perhaps the place would. Despite the blizzard, despite the late hour and the swarm of reporters waiting to tear him apart, Johnny insisted on going to the bandstand. He had to stand where the blood was spilled. He had to walk into the storm, guided by a sheriff who had run out of options and a conscience that would not let him sleep while a monster walked the streets of Castle Rock. The siege began the moment they stepped out of the sheriff's office. The press, hungry and relentless, swarmed Johnny Smith and Sheriff Bannerman like a pack of wild dogs, reminding Johnny of a chaotic kennel where snarling collies would nip at your heels. The questions were a barrage of noise, demanding to know if the psychic had solved the Castle Rock murders, if he had been deputized, if there was any hope at all. Bannerman, a man of solid build and usually solid temperament, pushed through the throng with a grim no comment, shielding Johnny as they descended into the snowy night. It wasn't until they bypassed the police cruiser and headed on foot toward the town common that the reporters realized the investigation was moving to the very scene of the crimes. Like a flock of confused birds, they scrambled, ill-equipped for the biting cold, to follow the two men into the dark heart of the mystery. The atmosphere on the common was one of suffocating dread. The wind howled, whipping snow into blinding sheets, a physical manifestation of the confusion surrounding the case. Bannerman had roped off the area, a futile attempt to impose order on a chaotic evil. As they trudged toward the snow-mounded benches, Johnny wasn't just walking through a storm, he was walking into the past. He asked to see where the killer had sat, where the cigarette butts had been found. Kneeling in the snow, Johnny looked less like a detective and more like a penitent at prayer, his fragile physical state evident in his pallor. When Johnny touched the weather-beaten wood of the bench, the dead zone opened. It wasn't a gentle viewing, it was a violent seizure of his senses. The psychic flash superimposed the warm, hazy memories of summer band concerts over the bleak winter reality. But beneath the nostalgia of God Bless America and high school romances lay a predatory darkness. Johnny didn't just see the killer, he began to feel him. He merged with the mind of the murderer, a transition that terrified Bannerman. Johnny's face went blank, his eyes inhuman, and he began to speak in a voice that wasn't his own. He whispered the word slick. This is the terror of Johnny's gift. It forces him to inhabit the monsters he hunts. He became slick, a taunting, arrogant persona who believed himself untouchable. The vision spiraled deeper, past the murders, into the psychological genesis of the killer. Johnny saw a child, humiliated and abused by a mother who forced him to wear a clothespin on his genitals as punishment for perceived sins. The pain of the clothespin became inextricably linked with sexual arousal and hatred, a Freudian nightmare that birthed a serial killer. The vision culminated in a terrifying image, a black shape looming in the snow, a man with eyes like shiny quarters holding a red stop sign. The psychic connection was so intense it physically repulsed Johnny, sending him scrambling away from the bench, screaming for his mother. But the vision wasn't done. He dragged Bannerman to the bandstand, the site of the actual violence. Here the horror was tactile. Johnny crawled on the floor, his hands freezing, reliving the assaults. He realized why no skin samples were found under the victim's fingernails. The killer wore a slick vinyl raincoat. The victims had clawed uselessly at plastic. As the vision released him, leaving him shivering and sobbing, the identity locked into place. The stop sign, the authority, the raincoat. Back in the warmth of the office, the revelation shattered the room. Johnny named the killer Frank Dodd. Bannerman's reaction was immediate and violent denial. Frank Dodd was his deputy, a man he considered a surrogate son, a man who crossed school children safely in the mornings. The psychological barrier for Bannerman was immense. To accept Frank as the strangler was to accept that he had harbored a monster. He struck Johnny, a physical rejection of the truth, knocking the smaller man to the floor. But the seeds of doubt were sown. Johnny, bloody but resolute, challenged Bannerman to check the records. The logic began to dismantle the emotional defense. The murders stopped when Frank was away in Colorado for a law enforcement course. A call to Pueblo confirmed a similar unsolved murder during Frank's stay there. The timeline was perfect. The monstrous truth was undeniable. The climax of the night took them to the Dodd residence, a small saltbox house battened down against the storm. The environment here was thick with toxicity. Mrs. Henrietta Dodd, a massive, sickly woman, blocked the door. She was the architect of Frank's pathology, the wielder of the clothespin. When Johnny touched her, a horrific circuit closed between them. She knew. She had always known what her son was, and she had protected him. The psychic contact sent her into a cardiac episode, but there was no time for mercy. Johnny and Bannerman raced upstairs, the wind sobbing around the eaves like the ghosts of Frank's victims. Frank's room was a shrine to arrested development, clown wallpaper and toys. but the man himself was gone. They found the bathroom door locked. A kick from Bannerman shattered the lock and revealed the final, grotesque tableau. Frank Dodd had escaped earthly justice. He sat on the toilet, naked save for his vinyl raincoat and hood, his throat slit with a razor blade. The blood was everywhere, spraying the ceiling and the shower curtain adorned with ducks. Around his neck, a sign written in lipstick offered the only closure they would get. I confess. The suicide was the ultimate act of slick. One last move to stay out of their clutches. The psychic assault and the gruesome discovery were too much for Johnny. As the reality of the scene washed over him, he collapsed into darkness. The aftermath was a different kind of storm. The media transformed Johnny into a national curiosity, the new Hercos. He was hailed as a hero in the papers, his face plastered in Newsweek, but the reality of his life was crumbling. He returned home to recover from frostbite and exhaustion, hoping to slip back into the quiet obscurity of a high school English teacher. But the world doesn't let you touch the darkness without staining you. On New Year's Eve, the final blow landed not from a killer, but from bureaucracy. Standing by his mailbox in the biting cold, Johnny received a letter from his friend and principal, Dave Pelson. The school board had voted to fire him. The reason was as bureaucratic as it was cruel. He was too controversial. The man who had stopped a serial killer was deemed unfit to teach literature. As Johnny stood in the snow, surrounded by piles of fan mail from desperate strangers begging for psychic miracles, people wanting to find lost husbands or dead babies, he felt the crushing weight of his gift. He had served the community, he had saved future victims, and in return, he had been stripped of his livelihood and his normalcy. He dropped to his knees, gathering the letters in the freezing cold, weeping as he read the school motto on the letterhead: to teach, to learn, to know, to serve. The irony was bitter and absolute. He had fulfilled his mission, but the cost was everything he had left. The dead zone had taken Frank Dodd, but it had also claimed John Smith's life. Chapter 17. We open in the deceptive tranquility of a New Hampshire summer. The setting is almost painfully idyllic, the Chatsworth estate, complete with a shimmering pool and the drone of a lawnmower. Here, Johnny Smith has found a sanctuary, hiding away from the prying eyes of the press and the desperate people seeking his psychic touch. He has returned to his original calling, teaching, but his student, Chuck Chatsworth, represents a unique challenge. Chuck is the golden boy, captain of the football team, wealthy, handsome, and seemingly perfect. Yet, he is crippled by a secret shame, a severe reading phobia that leaves him stuttering over words like a terrified child. It is fascinating to observe Johnny here. For the first time since his coma, he isn't a freak or a victim. He is a mentor. He recognizes that Chuck's problem isn't stupidity. It is a psychological blockade, a panic response to the printed page that creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. Johnny decides to use a technique that borders on hypnotic suggestion. He forces Chuck to read a pulp western, but immediately distracts him with rapid-fire questions about his personal life, his girlfriend, his baseball preferences, his father. By keeping Chuck's conscious mind busy with roses, Johnny allows the subconscious to scream fire. It is a breakthrough moment. When distracted, Chuck can recall the details of what he just read with perfect clarity. Johnny explains this phenomenon using language that feels uncomfortably close to home for him. He describes the block as a dead zone in the brain, a faulty circuit that needs to be bypassed. This is a crucial piece of psychological insight. Johnny is projecting his own physiological reality onto Chuck's learning disability, finding a way to heal the boy by understanding his own brokenness. For a moment, the supernatural horror recedes, replaced by the triumph of human connection. Johnny has successfully taught the boy to switch hit inside his own brain. Chapter 18. The narrative shifts abruptly from the sun-drenched pool to the claustrophobic interior of a Chevy Caprice, plunging us into a gritty noir atmosphere. Warren Richardson, a man involved in shady real estate dealings, ends his workday expecting the mundane comfort of pork chops and television. Instead, he finds terror in his backseat. This scene serves as a brutal counterweight to the previous chapter's optimism, introducing the enforcement arm of a rising political force. The intruder is Sonny Elliman, a man with the terrifying calmness of a predator. He isn't there to kill Richardson, but to deliver a message. Richardson has been leaking information about corruption and kickbacks regarding a certain candidate's campaign to the press. Sonny's methods are visceral and terrifyingly intimate. He digs his thumb into Richardson's neck, pressing on the carotid artery, threatening to turn the man into a human turnip. What makes this scene so effective is the psychological dismantling of Richardson. Sonny doesn't just inflict pain. He invokes the safety of Richardson's family, his wife, his young son. He whispers about plastic surgery and kidnappings with a veneer of polite concern. The specific threat that Richardson needs to learn to use Q-tips to clean out his ears and listen better is absurd, yet horrifying. This is our first real look at the machinery behind the clownish exterior of Greg Stillson's campaign. While the candidate plays the fool for the public, his operatives use mafia tactics in the shadows. Richardson is left broken and weeping, silenced not by the law, but by the primal fear of violence. Chapter 19. Time has passed, and Johnny is settling into a comfortable rhythm at the Chatsworth estate. He looks in the mirror and sees a man aging too fast. The white streak in his hair and the lines on his face are the physical toll of his psychic burden. Yet life feels almost normal. He visits his father, Herb, and is relieved to see the old man finding companionship with the widow, Charlene Mackenzie. It's a touching human moment that grounds Johnny before the storm returns. We get a glimpse into Johnny's recent past, his politician-watching phase. In a flashback to a frozen February morning, we see Johnny encounter Jimmy Carter outside a shoe factory. This interaction confirms the terrifying precision of Johnny's gift. When he shakes Carter's hand, he gets the zap, a sudden, absolute knowledge that this man will be president. It unnerves the Secret Service and Carter himself. Johnny sees the future administration, the school Carter's daughter will attend, and the geopolitical shifts to come. It establishes that Johnny's visions aren't hallucinations. They are spoilers for history itself. Back in the present, Roger Chatsworth returns home, and Johnny receives a bonus for his success with Chuck. Roger is a pragmatist, a self-made man who believes the world is divided into doers and bullshitters. He respects Johnny because he delivers results. But this mutual respect is framed by a conversation that introduces the antagonist of our story in full force. They sit down to watch the evening news, and Walter Cronkite introduces a wild card in the New Hampshire congressional race, Greg Stillson. The contrast is jarring. After the serious political analysis, the screen fills with a rally that looks more like a circus. Stillson is a demagogue in the truest sense. He wears a construction helmet, throws hot dogs into the crowd, and screams about throwing the bums out and sending pollution to Mars. He is electric, ridiculous, and terrifyingly charismatic. He appeals to the anger and disenfranchisement of the working class with simple, loud, impossible solutions. Roger Chatsworth laughs at the spectacle. To a wealthy, educated man like Roger, Stillson is a harmless clown, a way for the voters to vent their frustration before the establishment inevitably corrects itself. He calls it comic relief. But Johnny doesn't laugh. As he watches the man on the screen, surrounded by motorcycle gang bodyguards, screaming about vengeance and nationalism, Johnny feels a vibration of wrongness. He learns that Stillson is polling incredibly well. While Roger dismisses Stillson as a temporary joke, the narrative implies something far darker. The man who ordered the torture of Warren Richardson is now charming the masses with theatrics. The dead zone isn't just in Johnny's head anymore. It's manifesting in the political landscape of America. The chapter ends with Johnny being coaxed into a drink, but his unease lingers. The psychic radar has picked up a blip that everyone else is ignoring. Chapter 20. In the sweltering quiet of mid-August, Johnny Smith found himself adrift in the solitude of the Chatsworth estate. The family had departed for Canada, leaving Johnny alone with the silence, save and Go Fat, the Vietnamese groundskeeper who lived above the garage. There is a deceptive peace in these moments, a calm that often precedes the psychological storms that define Johnny's life. He spent his days feeling almost regal, driving the borrowed Mercedes and retreating to his father's house in Pownell, watching Herb Smith court a new happiness. But the gravity of fate always seemed to pull him back to the center of the web. Back at the estate, floating in the pool, Johnny's tranquility was pierced by a conversation with Nyo. The gardener spoke of his citizenship class and their upcoming field trip to a political rally in Trimble for a man named Greg Stillson. Here the narrative shifts from the mundane to the ominous through Ngo's cultural lens. Ngo described a game from his homeland called the Laughing Tiger. In this game, a child dons a tiger skin and chases the others, laughing but also biting and growling. The terror lies in the duality, the laughter of the human and the violence of the beast. Ngo, with a terrifyingly calm perception, noted that Greg Stillson seemed to know this game intimately. He was a man playing a role, but the teeth beneath the smile were sharp. This observation planted a seed of disquiet in Johnny. It's the kind of intuitive dread that transcends logic, a vibration on a frequency only Johnny seems tuned to receive. Despite his best intentions to go to Boston, to lose himself in baseball or books, Johnny found himself inexorably drawn to Trimble. It was as if his psychic gift was not just a passive receiver, but a leash dragging him toward necessary confrontations. He tried to rationalize it as a hobby, collecting politicians like stamps, but his body betrayed him with a pounding heart and a sense of impending doom. He was seeking the wild card in the deck, the political equivalent of the monster Frank Dodd. When Johnny arrived in Trimble, the scene was a tableau of carefully curated Americana. The rally was set up in a town park, disguised as a casual picnic, but Johnny's eye caught the discrepancies. The sound system was professional concert grade, the organization too precise. But the most jarring element was the security. A phalanx of motorcyclists arrived, not the Hells Angels of nightmares, but sanitized, clean-cut men in denim. Yet, the threat remained. In their back pockets, they carried sawed-off pool cues. They were the Praetorian Guard for a populist clown, standing with a vacuous good humor that masked a capacity for organized violence. They were, in essence, brown shirts for the bicentennial era. The candidate arrived not with policy, but with theatrics, a marching band, a white van, and a construction helmet. Greg Stillson was a force of nature, radiating a charisma that bordered on mass hypnosis. The crowd didn't just support him, they consumed him, and he fed them raw energy in return. Johnny, caught in the crush, felt the hysteria rising. He tried to remain an observer, a ghost at the banquet, but the crowd surged, pushing him to the front line. The moment of contact was inevitable. Stillson, working the crowd with the frantic energy of a man possessed, grabbed Johnny's hand. In that split second, the physical world dissolved. This is the curse of the dead zone, the touch that rips away the veil of time. Johnny wasn't just shaking a hand, he was seizing a live wire of destiny. The sensation was overwhelming, a black freight train of knowledge roaring through a tunnel, obliterating the present. The vision that assaulted him was fragmented but horrifyingly specific. He saw Stillson years in the future, older, balding, taking the oath of office for the presidency. The atmosphere was filtered through a strange, suffocating blue light, slashed with yellow markings like tiger stripes. The horror wasn't in the ceremony, but in the psychic resonance of it. Behind the blue filter lay a vision of absolute destruction. Johnny felt the sensation of flying over a ruined landscape, a world decimated by the man swearing to protect it. He heard the voice of the laughing tiger, the voice of a mad god rejoicing in chaos. It was a vision of Armageddon, presided over by the man in the hard hat. When Johnny snapped back to reality, the transition was violent. He recoiled as if burned, the sheer magnitude of the vision causing a physical short circuit. Stillson, sensing the sudden shift from adoration to revulsion, looked at Johnny with genuine terror. For a moment, the mask slipped. Johnny, disoriented and terrified, saw the security guards rushing him, their pool cues raised. The irony was sharp. He had seen the end of the world, but he was about to be beaten for a threat he hadn't yet verbalized. Darkness swallowed him before the blows could land, a merciful retreat into oblivion. Chapter 21. Johnny awoke in a holding cell, the throbbing in his head a dull reminder of the psychic and physical trauma. He was not being charged, but he was certainly being studied. Across from him sat the local police chief and a man from the FBI, an agent named Langty. The dynamic here is crucial. The authorities were aware of Stillson. They knew his security team consisted of reformed biker thugs with records of violence. They knew Stillson was a radioactive element, unstable and dangerous. Yet, they were paralyzed by the system they served. Langte, the embodiment of bureaucratic cynicism, viewed Stillson as a temporary madness, a hula-hoop fad of politics that would burn itself out. He warned Johnny to stay away, admitting the danger, but dismissing the long-term threat. It highlights the terrifying gap between institutional knowledge and action. The FBI saw a troublemaker, but Johnny saw the Antichrist. Upon returning to the Chatsworth estate, Johnny found no fat tending to his junk trees. The conversation that followed provided a chilling counterpoint to the FBI's inaction. Ngo, seeing the bruise on Johnny's head, offered a parable from his own war-torn youth. He spoke of a tiger that had turned man-eater, preying on the weak in a village depleted of men. The villagers didn't wait for the authorities or hope the tiger would lose interest. They baited a trap with a corpse and beat the beast to death with farming tools. Ngo's message was unambiguous. Stillson was a man-eater. The gentle gardener who planted weeds for a rich man believed in the necessity of the political kill, or perhaps something more literal. Bam, 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 he said, pantomiming a gun. It was a shocking intrusion of brutal pragmatism into Johnny's moral struggle. Ngo understood what the FBI agent did not. You cannot coexist with a tiger that has tasted human flesh. As autumn set in, the world continued its mundane rotation. Johnny's father, Herb, prepared for remarriage, finding a second wind in life that touched Johnny with a bittersweet joy. Chuck, the student Johnny had been tutoring, was thriving, preparing for a future Johnny had helped unlock. But while those around him moved forward, Johnny was stuck in the gravity well of his vision. He became a Stillson file, compiling notebooks of research, trying to find the logic behind the madness. The dossier he assembled was a portrait of a sociopath masquerading as a savior. He He traced Stillson's history. A drifter, a brawler, a failed rainmaker who once conned desperate farmers during a drought. Stillson had always been a predator, using religion, intimidation, and populism as weapons. He had climbed the ladder from local nuisance to mayor, and now, as the election returns came in that November, to the US House of Representatives, the media treated Stillson as a colorful eccentric, a breath of fresh air. They missed the pattern of violence at his rallies, the authoritarian crackdowns during his mayoral term, the mysterious funding. Johnny alone saw the tiger stripes beneath the suit. The obsession began to isolate him, turning him into a watcher in the shadows, terrified that his knowledge was a burden he couldn't share without being branded a lunatic. The psychological toll manifested in a recurring nightmare. In it, he was back at the rally, shaking the hand, the blue filter descending. But the dream always ended the same way, with the smell of burning high-tension wires and the sound of a woman screaming. It was a sensory premonition of a future he was desperate to deny. Johnny Smith was left with a single agonizing ethical question, one he wrote in his notebook and circled 3 times. It was the question that would define the rest of his fractured life. If you could go back in time to 1932, would you kill Hitler? The election was over. The tiger was loose in the halls of power. And Johnny Smith went to sleep, praying for a dreamless night, but knowing the laughing tiger was waiting behind his closed eyes. Chapter 22. The year 1977 begins not with a bang, but with the quiet, bittersweet chime of wedding bells. Herb Smith, finally moving past the long shadow of his grief, marries Charlene Mackenzie in a ceremony that feels like a desperate grasp at normalcy. For Johnny, standing there as best man, the occasion is a complex tapestry of emotions. He watches Sarah Hazlitt, once his Sarah, stand radiant and pregnant beside her husband, a rising politician. A sharp, bitter pang of jealousy strikes Johnny, a reminder of the life the ice stole from him. But it passes, leaving behind a residue of melancholic acceptance. But the true weight of this chapter lies in a corner of the reception hall where Johnny seeks out Hector Markston, the bride's elderly father. Hector is a relic of the Great War, a man who saw the horrors of Belleau Wood. Johnny, wrestling with the dark shape he sees in Greg Stillson's future, poses a hypothetical question that is actually a moral litmus test. If you could go back to 1932, would you kill Hitler? The old man's reaction is visceral. He produces a worn pocket knife, a blade that has survived trenches and mustard gas. With a chilling, quiet intensity, Hector describes exactly how he would drive that blade into a tyrant's heart and twist it. There is no hesitation in the old soldier, only the brutal arithmetic of sacrificing one life to save millions. Later, Johnny poses the same question to young Chuck Chatsworth. The boy's answer is the same. He would kill the monster, even if it meant his own execution. It is a terrifying consensus that begins to harden the cement of Johnny's resolve. The universe is whispering to him that proactive violence, no matter how abhorrent, might be a moral duty. As spring arrives, Johnny's circle shrinks. His friend No departs for a job in North Carolina, leaving Johnny alone with his demons and the rising tigers in his mind. Chapter 23. By June, the heat of summer settles over New Hampshire, bringing with it the thick electric tension of storm season. It is graduation day for Chuck Chatsworth. The boy is triumphant, thanking Johnny for helping him reach this milestone. But as Chuck embraces his tutor, the dead zone flares with violent, catastrophic clarity. Johnny is slammed by a vision of hell. He smells the sickening scent of roasting pork, burning human flesh. He sees a venue called Kathy's struck by lightning, the exits jammed, the insulation igniting. It is a premonition of absolute doom. Johnny's psychic dam breaks in public. He screams warnings, terrifying the graduation party guests. He is viewed not as a savior, but as a madman, a freak spoiling a celebration. Chuck's girlfriend, Patty, faints from the sheer force of Johnny's hysteria. Roger Chatsworth, ever the pragmatist, whisks Johnny away. He doesn't believe in the second sight, but he believes in Johnny's distress. In a desperate bid to prove the delusion wrong, they drive to Kathy's in Somersworth. The owner is hostile, dismissing their warnings as the ravings of a lunatic. But Roger notices one chilling detail that anchors the vision in reality. The building has no lightning rods. Despite his skepticism, Roger decides to play it safe. He hosts a private party at his home, keeping Chuck and his friends away from the doom that awaits them. It is a decision made not out of belief, but out of paternal caution. As the night wears on and thunder rumbles in the distance, they play cribbage, the mundane masking the supernatural dread. Then the radio cuts through the music. The news breaks. Kathy's has burned. A lightning strike. Over 70 young people are dead, trapped in a firestorm exactly as Johnny predicted. The silence that descends on the Chatsworth home is heavy with the weight of survival guilt. Roger realizes that his son is alive only because of Johnny's madness. Patty Strachan, hysterical with shock, accuses Johnny of causing the fire with his mind, a frantic attempt to rationalize the irrational. But for Johnny, the message is far darker. As he sits amidst the weeping survivors, he hears the ghostly echo of his mother's voice. "Do your duty, John." The test case is complete. He knows now that the future is not set in stone. It can be changed, but the price of prophecy is isolation. Chapter 24. The aftermath of the fire scatters the characters like leaves in a gale. We move into the autumn of 1977 through a series of letters that highlight Johnny's flight from notoriety. He has fled to the anonymity of the American Southwest, hiding in Phoenix, trying to outrun his own legend. Roger Chatsworth writes to him, desperate to send money, not as a reward, but as a penance. Roger is haunted by the fact that he could have saved everyone if he had simply paid the club owner to close for the night. He calls himself the Hound of Heaven, refusing to let Johnny fade into poverty. He pays Johnny's hospital bills, clearing the financial debt of the coma. But the moral debt remains unpaid. Herb Smith's letters reveal a father's deep worry. He urges Johnny to see a doctor, noting that the headaches are getting worse, a physical manifestation of the psychic pressure building inside Johnny's skull. The danger of a blood clot looms, a biological time bomb ticking alongside the political one. Meanwhile, Chuck writes from prep school, trying to maintain a connection with the man who saved his life. He mentions Greg Stillson. The news is not good for those who hope for sanity in politics. Stillson is thriving, his populist, man of the people act winning over the locals. He is normalizing the absurd, integrating biker gangs into his security detail and charming the electorate. But a darker note is struck in the margins of the news. A clipping reveals that FBI agent Edgar Langty, the man investigating Stillson, has been murdered in a car bombing. It is a mob-style execution that screams of a cover-up. The message is implicit but clear. Stillson leaves no loose ends. Chapter 25. By the fall of 1978, the scattered puzzle pieces in Johnny's mind are beginning to form a terrifying picture. Johnny is no longer just a passive observer. He has become a chronicler of the apocalypse. He fills notebook after notebook with data on Greg Stillson. The man is no longer a localized joke. He is a national phenomenon, riding the wave of the America Now party. Johnny fixates on the symbolism of Stillson's construction helmet, a prop that represents the dismantling of democracy. He analyzes his options with the cold logic of a desperate man. The tragedy at Cathy's provided the proof of concept. Johnny can alter the future. He saved Chuck, but he also learned a bitter lesson. People will not believe a warning until the bodies are counted. To stop a man like Stillson, who is destined to unleash a global conflict, warnings will not suffice. Johnny runs the simulations in his journals. Exposure? Unlikely to work. Stillson is Teflon, and the witnesses like Langty end up dead. Sabotage. Too risky. The only variable that guarantees the safety of the world is the removal of the variable itself. Assassination. It is a thought that sickens him. Johnny is a mild-mannered man, a teacher, not a killer. He writes, "Murder is wrong," repeating it like a mantra, trying to hold on to his humanity. But the headaches are blinding now. The dead zone expanding. He realizes he is running out of time. The biological clock in his brain is synchronizing with the political clock of the nation. He is being cornered by destiny, forced to choose between his soul and the survival of the world. The time for observation is ending. The time for action is drawing near. Chapter 26. The end begins not with a bang, but with the quiet, mundane shuffle of commerce. It is the day after Christmas 1978 in Phoenix, Arizona. A man named Bud Prescott stands behind a counter, unaware that he is arming fate itself. He serves a customer who looks less like a man and more like a walking ghost. Haggard, graying prematurely, eyes swimming in bloodshot red. This customer, paying in cash peeled from a thick roll, buys a Remington 700 rifle. He signs the ledger with the most anonymous of names, John Smith. It is a pseudonym that is technically a lie, yet profoundly true. He has become a non-person, a cipher moving through the cracks of society. The clerk notices the man's limp and the scarring on his neck, thinking these unique identifiers will make him easy to remember. He doesn't realize he has just sold the instrument of history to a man already walking in the shadow of his own grave. Johnny's journey is a slow, painful pilgrimage toward destiny. He moves like a mechanism winding down, his body failing even as his resolve hardens. He buys a cowhide attaché case in an office supply store, his appearance so ravaged that a salesman notes a fire spot in his eye, a physical manifestation of the hemorrhage ticking away inside his brain. He travels by train, a phantom drifting across the American landscape. When he books his ticket to New York, he nearly collapses from the agony in his head. He speaks of fireworks to the ticket agent, a grim metaphor for the neurological explosions destroying his mind. He is polite, tipping well, moving with the heavy, lurching gait of a man carrying the weight of the world in a briefcase. By January 6, 1979, he is in New York. A taxi driver, sensing the aura of death clinging to his passenger, asks if he is sick, perhaps suffering from gallstones. Johnny admits only to thinking of a past taxi ride, a ghostly memory of a life before the coma, before the ice, before the dead zone opened its eye. He is a man unstuck in time, haunted by what was and terrified of what will be. On a bus to New Hampshire, a child senses the wrongness of him. Children, in the lore of the uncanny, often see what adults ignore. The boy asks if the man is dying. Johnny smiles, a sweet, terrible expression on a face half paralyzed by scars. He is indeed dying, and he is traveling toward the place where he intends to take a monster with him. He arrives in Timsdale, New Hampshire. It is a small town, the kind of place that forms the backbone of Greg Stillson's populist support. In a local pub, Johnny encounters the terrifying reality of the Stillson phenomenon. The bartender, a decent man, speaks of Stillson with reverence, showcasing a signed photo of the candidate. He believes Stillson is the only honest man left, a square shooter who listens to the common people. This is the seduction of the demagogue. Stillson has convinced these good people that he is their champion. Johnny realizes that the man is a chameleon, shifting his persona to fit the audience, hiding the beast behind a mask of folksy charm. Johnny tests his resolve here. He feels the weight of the murder he plans to commit. He argues with God, wondering why he, a broken schoolteacher, must be the one to stop the apocalypse. He wishes he could walk away, let the world burn, if that is its choice. But the vision of the bartender's blind faith and the knowledge of the nuclear fire Stillson will eventually unleash steals him. He leaves the bar, stepping into the snow, carrying the burden of a prophet who knows that to save the future, he must destroy the present. He writes a final letter to his father, the act of a dutiful son trying to explain the unexplainable, before turning his face toward the end. Chapter 27. The stage is set in the town of Jackson. Johnny infiltrates the town hall days before the rally. He poses as a photographer for Yankee magazine, a disguise that allows him to scout the kill zone. The headache is a constant companion now, a rhythmic thudding that marks the countdown. He finds his perch in the gallery, a high vantage point overlooking the stage. He waits. The waiting is an ordeal of cold and silence. He hides in the darkened hall through the night, shivering as the temperature drops. In the darkness, he is visited by memories, ghosts of his past. He dreams of the carnival wheel from years ago, the moment his luck turned supernatural, but now the wheel is rigged and the prize is death. He wakes to the freezing reality of the empty hall. He mails his final letters, severing his last ties to the living world. He breaks back into the hall, climbs to the gallery and assembles the rifle. The clicks of the weapons sound like the gavel of judgment. As dawn breaks, the custodian arrives to stoke the fire and test the sound system. Johnny watches from above, a silent spectator. The sound of the microphone feedback screams through his sensitive, damaged brain. A torture he endures in silence. Later, Stillson's security team sweeps the building. They are thuggish, arrogant men, checking rooms, but lazily skipping the gallery where fate is crouching. They leave, unknowingly sealing their boss's doom. The crowd fills the hall. It is a cross-section of America. Old ladies, working men, a young mother with her son in a bright blue snowmobile suit. The atmosphere is electric, charged with the cult of personality. When Greg Stillson enters, the room erupts. He is charismatic, wearing a ski cap with a tassel, playing the role of the people's hero to perfection. Johnny stands. The moment stretches, time dilating as it often does in high-stress anomalies. The applause continues even as people see the man with the rifle. It is a tableau of American violence, a scene ripped from the nightmares of the decade. Johnny shoulders the rifle. He locks eyes with Stillson. There is a spark of recognition, not of friendship, but of primal antagonism. The monster sees the hunter. Johnny fires. He misses the kill. The bullet shatters the podium. Chaos erupts. The crowd becomes a stampede. Johnny fires again, but his physical deterioration betrays him. Security returns fire, bullets chipping the wood around him, grazing his skin. He is bleeding, his vision blurring, but he racks the bolt for another shot. Then, the unthinkable happens. The law of Greg Stillson, the image of the tough, fearless leader, shatters in a single second. Stillson, panicked and desperate, grabs the nearest human shield. It is the child, the little boy in the blue snowmobile suit. He holds the squirming boy in front of him, cowering behind the innocent life. Through the scope, Johnny sees it. The blue filter of his visions overlays the reality. He sees the tiger he has feared, but now the tiger is hiding behind a child. Johnny's finger freezes on the trigger. He cannot shoot. To kill the monster, he would have to become one. In that hesitation, the morality of the man overrides the mission of the assassin. He lowers the rifle. Security fires. Johnny is struck, his body flung back by the impact. He falls from the gallery, crashing onto the benches below, his back broken, his life ebbing away in a rush of blood. He lies there, believing he has failed. He believes he punked out. But the camera has captured what the bullet could not. A young photographer named Clawson has snapped the picture of the century. The candidate, the tough guy, cowering behind a toddler. Johnny doesn't know it yet, but he has destroyed Stillson more thoroughly than death ever could. He has stripped away the mask. Political suicide is far more permanent than martyrdom. Stillson, enraged and terrified, looms over the dying Johnny. He demands to know who this assassin is. With his last ounce of strength, Johnny reaches out and grabs Stillson's ankle. This is the final psychic contact. The touch. Johnny expects to feel the future he feared, the nuclear fire, the screams. Instead, he feels nothing. A dead battery. An empty house. The timeline has been severed. By forcing Stillson to reveal his true cowardice to the world, Johnny has erased the future where Stillson becomes the dictator who destroys the world. The monster is politically dead. Johnny Smith dies not in agony, but in peace. The voices fade into a sweet hum. He drifts back down the dark corridor of his mind, the same one he traveled during his coma years ago. He has completed the circle. He is free. Notes from the dead zone. The aftermath is a flurry of confusion and rationalization. The world tries to understand the madman who shot a congressman. A committee is formed, chaired by Senator Cohen, to investigate the assassination attempt. They drag out the witnesses, the doctors, the friends. Dr. Van testifies about the tumor in Johnny's brain, a massive growth in the parietal lobe. The skeptics seize on this. They want to believe that the tumor pulled the trigger, that biology, not destiny, caused the violence. It is easier for society to accept a medical anomaly than a psychic imperative. But the testimony of Dr. Wyzak cuts through the scientific detachment. He insists that Johnny was sane. He argues that while the tumor was a ticking clock, the mind behind the act was lucid. Johnny was a man acting under the burden of terrible knowledge. He wasn't hallucinating. He was solving a problem the rest of the world couldn't see. Johnny's letters, read into the record, are heartbreakingly clear. He writes to his father, explaining that the tumor was merely the mechanism of his death, not the author of his actions. He compares himself to Elijah or Jonah, prophets who tried to run from God's command, but were cornered by fate. He explains the vision of the blue filter, the certainty of nuclear war, the flashpoint in South Africa. He writes not as a fanatic, but as a man grieving the life he is forced to discard. In the end, the truth of the event is settled not in a courtroom, but in a graveyard. Years later, Sarah visits Johnny's grave. It is October, the season of dying leaves. She has avoided this place, moving on with her life, raising children, living the normal existence Johnny sacrificed. She kneels by the stone, overwhelmed by the unfairness of it all. She cries out to the silence, and then a hand touches her neck. It is a phantom touch, warm and familiar. It is the echo of the man who loved her across the boundaries of time and death. For a fleeting second, she feels him standing there, hands in pockets, wearing that crooked grin. He is not lost in the void. He is there, in the autumn wind, in the rustle of the trees. He offers her no terrifying visions, only a final gesture of comfort. Sarah leaves the cemetery, driving back into her life. The wind blows through the trees, guarding the resting place of the man who saw the end of the world and gave everything to make sure it never happened. The dead zone is silent, its purpose fulfilled. Thank you for watching and stepping into the dead zone with me tonight. I hope you enjoyed this look at one of Stephen King's most heartbreaking stories. I will see you in the next video. Sleep well.